Hello and welcome to Fireside Fairytales. If you've never been here before, my name is Rory, and you're watching Varietal Literature's YouTube page, which is a page kind of dedicated to narrative and writing. It's a group of writers from Vancouver. And what we do on Tuesday nights, easily our most popular thing that we do, is we read old classic folklore and fairy tales and so on from history. I think I'm sitting a little high here. Let me adjust down. And for the last month, we've been sort of picking through some new sources that I found that have been just a delight to read. The recently translated works of old collections from folklorists we've looked at folklorists from Germany and from Norway. And tonight, we're going to be looking at more from Germany. If in the description below, there is a link to the translator, Jürgen, who is the person who translates all this, has a Patreon that you should absolutely support. It's not a lot of money to support, and it helps keep sort of the infrastructure of stories going. I don't know. That's the least romantic and poetic way to put it. We aren't reading any stories from Simon Hughes tonight, but we have also been reading some from those, and that's a Norwegian translator. But we will definitely do more stories from his collections as well. So that's what we've been doing for the last month, and we started the month with The Wild Hunt, which is kind of the basis for Santa. So if you haven't watched that, it's one of my personal favorites. The video is called "It's Not Christmas Until Odin Raids the Countryside." But we've also done a couple of other ones that are also from these sort of translated folklore from Germany and Norway, including Scary Ghost Stories from Christmases Long, Long Ago was a stream we did. We have a playlist of stuff for Fireside Fairytales. And last week we did a particularly interesting one for me, which is the devil is heavily associated to Christmas Eve. And that's actually going to come into play with some of the stories we read tonight. So it's worth it to go back and watch those if you haven't already. I should have said this earlier, but if you're not watching this live, down in the description below, there will be some timestamps, so you can just jump ahead to the beginning of whatever story interests you. And tonight, it's a little shorter because it is the week before Christmas, and as much as I'd like to create the illusion that I just sit here and wait to tell you stories, I am still a human being in the modern era. And it's been busy. Actually, what it has been in Vancouver is snowy. I know the reputation of Canada is that it snows a lot in Canada. That reputation is earned if you count landmass rather than metropolitan centers. Like, past a certain parallel of Canada, it's all snow once you hit certain seasons. But most people don't live in the snow. Like, the snowy regions are not very well populated. And most people live down at the border where it doesn't really snow. It tends to just rain, and occasionally you get spots of snow. You get more of it in like Ontario, but they're further north than where I am. But we got a ton of snow. Like in one night, we got just shy of like 1.5 feet, 2 feet of snow. The world has been shut down. So the window here, which, spoiler alert, is not my real window, is actually a pretty accurate reflection of what it looks like. And I was walking around it in today, and the thought that came to me was how much I would like to tell some of these stories out there in the snow. I think that would be cool. But there is logistically no way for me to do that. So what we're going to do instead is stay in here warm by the fire, away from the upwards of negative 14 with wind chill out there, and read you some stories. The theme tonight is going to be weapons that are associated with Christmas. The first one we're going to read is probably the most, meets that brief the most literally. It's a very short little bit that is, well, I won't give anything away. It's short enough. It doesn't go the way you think it's going to go. Called The Lucky Rod. And it's about a weapon of sorts that you can only create on Christmas Eve or Christmas. And then we're going to read a slightly longer tale about a very special type of blade and the smith who seeks to learn it. And we'll see some returning characters that we've seen in the months. And, well, it themes itself around Christmas. It sort of begins and ends on a year's worth of Christmases. I guess technically 2 years, but like bookending them. And so that's what we're doing tonight. If you are the kind of person who's like, damn it, I want my hour, I'll try to make up for it in other times. One thing I do want to say before we get going here is in January, partially because they've proven quite popular, so obviously it's something people are interested in, I think I might sort of theme January around ghost stories. Currently I have like 150 of them that I can pick from. Old folk, some like a paragraph long, some longer, of legends and traditions around ghosts. So I think I might do at least 1 or 2 streams about ghosts in January, because January to me is the dead month, and it feels like it would suit it. Okay, so with that said, my unusually long introduction. Normally I'm much shorter. We'll turn the music down a bit, turn the fire down a bit, and we'll get into a little bit of a story. Just get my sound effects up. Our story is about a hike, in a sense. Let me know if the sound effects ever intrude on your ability to comprehend the text, and I will turn something down. And if you don't know how to do that, there's a live chat. Join me in the live chat if you're watching live. Our first story is called The Lucky Rod, and it comes from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, a set of translations of old German folklore by Jürgen. Please support him. I put a pinned comment below with his info if you're not watching this live. It's not there currently. Yeah. The lucky rod of which is spoken here does not bring good luck, and is not a rod either, but a thick stick which is capable of beating up anyone, black and blue, on the command of its owner without any visible action of a human hand, no matter how near or far the victim might be. To attain such a stick, you must walk into the forest during the holy night of Christmas and cut off a young oak while incanting certain verses. However, you must not be shouted at during the way to the site and back home again, and not say any words either, for then the stick will not have any powers, and you might also suffer great misfortune. If this task is successful and someone obtains an empowered stick through such sacrilege, then a vengeful mind might very well consider this to be lucky. But whether it represents fortune for their souls is probably best judged by whoever blessed the stick. Hansforth of Edelbach in the Kaw River had such a vengeful mind as well. He could never forget when he had been insulted, even if the insult was purely imaginary. Once his cousin had demanded a small sum of money from him, which he had allegedly owed him. Hansfort denied the debt, rightfully or wrongfully, but had to pay it when the cousin sued him before the court. This rankled Hansfort so much that he was unable to sleep. Christmas approached, and Hansfort had heard of the lucky rod and knew how to attain one, so he decided to cut one and then make an attempt with it at the back of his cousin. When Christmas Eve had arrived and midnight was approaching, Hansfort started on the path into the nearby forest, and we can hear him hiking along now. At the entrance to the same, he encountered a well-built huntsman who was accompanied by 2 large dogs. The hunter said, "Good evening, Hansfort. Where are you going at this late hour?" Hansfort startled when he was greeted with his own name, for the moon was bright and the huntsman was fully illuminated. But Hansfort did not recognize him. Nevertheless, he replied the greeting and muttered something of an undelayable journey before continuing on his path. When he heard the bells of Ernskirchen ringing in midnight mass during the quiet winter night, he started with his task, and as soon as the stick was in his hands, he turned round and wanted to start on the way home, but then perceived that the huntsman was standing right behind him, but not with a friendly greeting, but with a terrible countenance. He grabbed Hansfort at his collar, soared high into the air with him, twisted his neck, then threw him to the ground so no bone remained whole. And on this site where this occurred, no blade of grass grows even today. That is, of course, the lucky rod, which, as the story says, is neither rod nor lucky. But you know, that's why you've got to know your strange, abstract, and incredibly rigorous rules, because at some point, somebody is going to you're gonna run afoul of them. His mistake there was talking to the fellow as he walked there. Now, if you've never watched this before and you're like, where are the princesses? Why are they not getting married? And so on. The next story is probably going to be more up your alley, first of all. But I do want to make a distinction here. We are reading tonight. We read both. We read fairy tales and folktales. But we are tonight reading folktales, folklore. Folklore is shorter, much more localized, and not really meant for kids. This stream is not tagged as for kids. If it's something really bad, I usually try to tag it out up front. The devil one has some genuinely disturbing elements. The one we did last week, so there's a content warning on that. But yes, just so you know, I probably should have said this before, but this isn't necessarily suitable to kids. There's a lot of violence and lots of questionable ethos, let's say. His hike is done. Let's end that. Okay, so our next one is a bit longer. I'm hoping our stream will run at least a half an hour, but it's always hard to tell how long a story will actually go. I usually get a good sense, but some it's hard to tell. But I do want to add a little bit of context on this one before I read it, because it does have, let's say, the remnants of old war propaganda in it, which unfortunately in modern times just sort of translates to some racism. So you understand, and I am pulling some of this from the commentary notes that come after the stories. It is something I already knew, but I am pulling this from some commentary notes. I don't read the commentaries on these stories because they're not the stories. Like, the stories are cultural property, but the commentary is a hard-earned, educated person's work. And you should go to the Patreon and pay for the book if you want to read all of that. It's fascinating stuff. It adds a lot of cool context. But when really relevant, I do like to make mention. And before I read this one, I want to mention that during the time that this story is likely to have born from, the Roman Catholic Church, enemy number one, keeping in mind it was basically a political organization at that point, pretty indistinguishable from things the king did, is what I mean, was warring with the Ottoman Empire. And the consequence of that was, well, I don't know if it's that different these days, but the consequence of that is that, like, the Middle East, or in with this section, what they call the Orient, was a war zone, understood through basically various pieces of written propaganda. There's no film or anything. It paints a certain image of this sort of savage, mysterious, whatever land. I just feel the need to add the context that where that is being developed from. It's being developed from people who were trying to recruit soldiers to go off to a foreign land and fight for the church. So, like, take it with a massive grain of salt. These are basically just two empires bickering over trade routes, essentially. I mean, there's definitely a bit more to it than that, but, keep that context in mind. This is not an accurate account. This is a German folklore account of what was then a major enemy of their nation. Okay, so, or at least a major institution in their nation, I should say. The story I'm going to read is called The Blades of Solingen, and it comes from Sunken Castle's Evil Poodles, and it's more of a romantic Folklore story, but it does have some recurring devilry in it. Actually, let me get one thing going here. Hoping that's not too loud. Might turn it down just a little bit. This concerns a smith, hence we are in a blacksmith shop. So this is The Blades of Solingen from Sunken Castle Evil Poodles, a collection of old German folklore which you can access through the Patreon, the translator, in the pinned comment below. The art of forging blades of a quality and excellence which approaches those of the world-famous Damascus steel was not yet known in Solingen in the 16th century. Well, there was no lack of good weaponsmiths who also who strived to copy the artful people of the Orient. None of them had succeeded, and many master smiths ruined themselves in futile attempts. Old Ruther was among these. He was a very experienced man who agreed in the pursuit of his profession. His most fervent desire was, at the time, relatively, they have bands of color in them. They look like they're tiger stripe blades. You've probably seen like a kitchen knife made that way or something. They have this folding technique they used. He had sacrificed a number of years to this pursuit, but he had not found success. With sorrow, he saw how his prosperity continually declined because of the constant, expensive, and time-consuming experiments. Once again, a failed test had caused him grief when he left his workshop in an abominable mood and entered his living room. His only daughter, Marta, did not know the true cause of the grievance which was carved deeply in the forehead of the old man. In vain she tried to improve his mood despite all her friendly words. She did not receive a reply. He did not even look at his favorite dish, which the attentive girl had wanted to surprise him with on this holy Christmas evening. "You should not have worked at this holy hour, Father," she said, "for this will never bring prosperity and blessing. You'll hammer and exhaust yourself as if tomorrow's bread depended on it." I don't know why she's Irish. "And yet I would assume that you had earned enough to take care of yourself in your old age. Give you good days aplenty." A heavy sigh was all the response that the master smith gave, and then he silently and dejectedly took a few bites and walked out the door. "Father is ill," said Martha, to herself in a low voice. "And now he is probably least inclined to listen to my concern, which weighs on me more every day and nearly crushes my heart. Wilhelm is a hard-working, decent young man, most diligent and keenest of my father's journeymen, and dearest and most respected by him above all the others. Should the good boy's poverty be a sufficient reason to deny myself to him. For those who didn't follow that, she's in love with Wilhelm and wants him to marry her, but she doesn't think her father will approve because he's poor. At that moment, Wilhelm stepped into the chamber, but he wasn't merry as it is usual for the youth, but pale and disturbed. "Marta," he said, Everything is over for us. I just dared ask the master for your hand, and while I was hesitant because of his dark and brooding manner, which he has developed for some time, I was counting on his favor and affection, which he'd proved to me more than once. What do you think he replied? He pulled a blade of a strange, pale, and marvelously veined appearance out of the shrine. He replied, 'As long as you are not capable of forging such a blade as your masterpiece, your application will be in vain. Only someone capable of doing this shall become my son-in-law and my heir.' And as he spoke these words, he cut a nail from the wall without making the slightest dint in the sword, proving the extraordinary strength of this steel. 'Go,' he said, while pushing me out of the door, in an almost mocking way, 'and learn in the distant Orient the arts which I have striven for in vain for many years. Though this alone you can maintain the fulfillment of your wishes, and I swear to you that nothing shall change my mind on this.' This report, well, it pushed the loving girl into the utmost distress. She had grown attached to the man she'd chosen in her heart since her youth, and burst into bright tears. 'My happiness is gone forever,' she bemoaned, 'for it will never be possible that you could journey to the distant Damascus, and then return from the war-torn lands of the infidels. I could not bear to know you in such danger, and would die before my time.' 'And yet,' asked Wilhelm, 'what other choice do we have? This journey, no matter how dangerous and how long it might be, at least offers us a glimmer of hope. And beholding your tears, Marta, only strengthens my conviction to dare everything, and without delay shall I prepare for this great undertaking. Either you shall see me successful within a year, or you shall never see me again.' With these words, the young man stormed out, and the next morning he was up and away without even saying goodbye, and on the 10th day of his journey, he reached the lonely mountains of the Spessart Range. And unfamiliar with its labyrinthine paths, he increasingly lost his way in the high-grown forests. He had already given up home to find shelter for the night when the night light of a lonely hut appeared before him late in the evening. With firm steps, he soon reached it, and he knocked. And an old, ugly woman opened the door.
"Good evening, Gamma," he said. "Can a poor soul who's lost his way stay here for the night? A bit of food and a bed of straw is all I desire. I shall thank you heartily."
"Step closer, handsome young man," screeched the old one by distorting her face in a loathsome manner, and she peeked at him disturbingly with her red-rimmed eyes. "I shall grant you hospitality, as long as it does not disturb you that another visitor will enter my home, whom I expect to arrive at this hour. Furthermore, I can only offer you this remote little chamber. There you may rest in peace until daybreak, and don't let anything disturb you."
He had no other choice but to accept the offer. So while she prepared milk soup for him, Wilhelm told the purpose of his journey to the woman. And after he had temporarily stilled his hunger, he laid down on the straw, but he was unable to attain sleep. The eerie manner of the old woman, her manner of speech and loathsomely sounding sing-song, which she emitted in strange melodies that sounded like the screeching of owls, which was accompanied by her two cats howling back and forth, kept him awake. As did his curiosity, since he would have liked to know what manner of visitor the old woman was expecting at night in this deserted forest. Well, midnight had arrived, and the moon began to cast its magical lights on the objects and in the imagination of the agitated young man, and gave them marvelous, strange shapes. The wind rose up and made the loose panels pardon me. Something got stuck in my throat there. The wind rose up and made the loose panels of rotten windows jingle in a way that sounded like the whispering of approaching people. Thick raindrops hitting the thin walls of the hut echoed like the quiet footsteps of a hostile being that had begun to circle the lonely man. And suddenly, there was a loud bang, which made him jolt up from his bed, and at the same moment, he heard this rattling sound as if a heavy object had fallen down the chimney. An exchange of voices convinced him that his hostess was no longer alone.
His hair stood on ends. He rose up and exploring through a gap in the door. The startled journeyman saw the shape of a man who was sitting at the blazing hearth. Something simmered in a large cauldron above the fire. And from time to time, blue flames burst out of it. In their light, Wilhelm was able to see the strange guest more clearly. He wore a red buff coat and a hat of the same color. His face was covered by a coarse beard, and his feet were hidden in the ash beneath the hearth. His flashing, piercing eyes were fixed on the old woman who was standing meekly before him, and his gestures conveyed anger. The listener could not understand what both of them discussed with each other, for it consisted of secret to avid whispering. But Wilhelm became quite startled when the old one suddenly turned and walked straight towards his little chamber, where he was peering through that gap in the door. He hurriedly threw himself down on the bed of straws, as we all do when Mom is coming, in order to pretend that he was asleep, and he had barely closed his eyes for this purpose. Pardon me. When he felt his arm had been grabbed.
"Wake up, my young man," screeched the witch. "Rise up! You shall make the acquaintance of a man from the distant lands of the Orient. He can spare you the journey here. He is acquainted with all knowledge. Talk to him and ask him to teach you what you need."
Wilhelm rose up to follow the old woman, and while he dreaded the unknown man, the desire for the secret art and his beloved overcame any concerns. Trembling, he stood before the mysterious stranger, whose lurking eyes resembled the paralyzing gaze of a snake, and which peered at the young man from beneath the wide brim of the hat. The mantle dyed in the color of fire, which the sinister man had wrapped tightly around his shoulders. His half-stretched right hand seemed to pacify the sizzling and bubbling in the cauldron. Finally, the old woman, who had retreated to a corner of the hearth so that only her face was visible, all this took on a demonic appearance in the light of the smoldering peat fire, and threw the poor young man wholly out of balance. In his heart he pleaded to all the saints to protect him so no evil would gain power over him. For a long time, the mysterious, terrible guest pierced Wilhelm with his eyes, then asked him with a deep, hoarse voice that sounded as if it came from a great distance,
"What do you want from me?"
The young man, who was barely in control of his emotions, told his backstory and the cause of his journey with almost incoherent, mumbling words. But as soon as he had finished, the fiend broke into a terrible laughter.
"I know what you desire to learn,"
he said with a changed, almost silent voice as he leaned forward to Wilhelm.
"but I do nothing for free. For the means which I shall give you, which contains everything you need, I merely require that you become my own. From the day onward when you make use of your newly attained skills, from that moment on I shall gift you 7 years years and 7 months in which you can enjoy life and the advantages I grant you. If you agree to my proposal, all the better for you. If not, you will return from the Orient never, and never see your martyr again.
Wilhelm was too overwhelmed to think it over. Furthermore, his love overwhelmed his heart. And thus, when he was presented with a piece of parchment, he signed his name. Never signed the name. With a cockerel's feather, oh dear, that had been dunked in the bubbling fluid. Well, if you know your infernal contracts, that's quite binding. In exchange, he received a well-sealed letter, and as soon as he had taken it into his possession, the stranger vanished. The unfortunate man spent the rest of the night in a feverish agitation and suffered from frightful dreams, but only at daybreak did he manage to attain restful sleep. And the sun had risen high when he woke up and left his straw bed. He did not find the old woman in the hut, nor did he find another living being. Hurriedly, as pursued by the Furies, he left the uncanny dwelling. After he wandered around in a stupor for a long time, he found pitying farmers by the time he was half dead from exhaustion. They helped him recover, then led him back to the road towards his home. Master Rutarn was highly astonished when he saw his journeyman, whom he believed to be far away, coming back so soon. He initially thought that the young man had regretted his decision and changed his mind, but he was shocked when Wilhelm told him everything and gave him the secret within the sealed letter, whose triple seal showed a tongue of flame and sword. After he'd heard everything and spent some time in serious contemplation, the devout master Smith said, "May God prevent your overwhelming love for my daughter, push you into an eternal damnation. This fortune or misfortune bringing paper shall never be unfolded by your or my hand. It shall rest in the most hidden corner of my shrine until better days. Until my grandchildren, over whom this demonic force has no power, can unseal and use it." And so, it was done. On the next Christmas Eve, Wilhelm became the husband of his beloved and overjoyed Martha. And Rutard gave him workshops and customers, retreating to the peace which the infirmity of his age required of him. Hard work and perseverance overcome even the toughest obstacles. And after a few years of the prosperity of the house, the prosperity of the house flowered up again, so that the old man was able to enjoy it. Only many years later, when Rutard was long gone to to his forefathers, and the aged Wilhelm had fallen into eternal slumber, did his sons, who succeeded him in his trade, discover the letter, and within it they found the instructions for the art of forging weapons that equaled the quality of the Damascene blades. And from that time onwards, the blades of Solingen have become so excellent and famous. And that is the story of the Blades of Solingen. A fairly, up to a point, traditional Devil's Deal, but then the way they get around it is a very curious sort of commentary, I think. Let me stop the sound here. It's a curious little commentary on, not being greedy in your time and looking forward to your children's future. And patience, and, overly fixated. The man in the beginning is making himself sick, trying to become this grand thing. But he realizes, it's not necessary to be that. You're not necessary to destroy your life for it. And in that, I think it's a very interesting tale. Well, GS says, I'm surprised by this ending. I was as well. It's very much what sold me on it. I mean, the fact that it's about a sort of Christmas blade that gains love and proves, certain moral characteristics was nice. But the creative manner by which they deal with the Devil's Deal is lovely. There's something very poetic about it, about giving this to their children. And in that selflessness, because it's not just that they outsmart the devil, right? It's that the way they outsmart the devil is by being charitable to people they may never meet, which is, in an essence, sort of the Christian response to the devil, right? At least their formulation of it. GS says, your best voices yet, Rory. Well, thank you very much, GS. If you enjoyed any part of this stream, the best thing you can do for me is, unfortunately, the tacky thing of liking and subscribing. It does help. I know we're all sick of hearing it. If you think you know someone in your life that would enjoy this tale as you're trapped in with the snow, or any of the tales about Christmas we've done this month, probably even better than that, you could share it with your friends and tell them, hey, here's something to put on the background while you cook this Christmas. And of course, if you are feeling particularly generous, or if I have done something to help you through the year or given you ideas or something, and you're like, how can I thank this person? Sorry, I bumped my own camera. I do have the ability for you to buy me a coffee down in the link below, but you do not have to do that. I mostly just enjoy telling stories. Buying a coffee just helps offset some costs, not the least of which, coffee costs. For those who did give this year, thank you so much. It was so kind, absolutely unnecessary, but extremely touching. We have one more stream this year, unless something terrible happens, like the snow takes out the internet. And that stream is just going to be, as one other streamer I watched said, it's the time of year where internet content creators phone it in. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a Christmas party stream on Thursday where basically I'm just going to play some random games to do with sort of improv storytelling. And it's pretty loose. You should come and hang out. It's a cool crowd. And yeah, it'll just be sort of we did a similar thing last year, sort of our chilled out, bring some baked goods, eat some food, and throw some prose down just for fun. It's a write-along stream. So if you like writing, or you like contributing to writing, or whatever else, you'll enjoy it. If you don't, if you just like the stories, then this is the last one of the year, our Fireside Fairytales. However, there is one more story I want to read. I just don't know where I would have time to record it, edit it, and put it out. But if I find the time, I will put that up. It probably will be after Christmas, even though it's a Christmas story, but it might be in that week after Christmas. But it's from S. Bjornson, and it's kind of not a folktale. He's a translator of folktales from the 19th century. We've read a bunch of his stuff before. Not a translator, rather, a collector of folklore in Norway. But he also writes his own stories. In the Devil stream we did last week, we read one of his stories where he couched a bunch of folk tales about the devil, mainly around winter and Christmas Eve and stuff, in a larger narrative. He also wrote just stories, and this would be one of them about his time taking a ride on Christmas Eve in Norway in early 19th century, and it's really beautiful. It's not really folklore, but it is of a time and a place that I think people who like this would like. But there's a bunch of things I got to work out before I do that, so I'm not promising it, but it would be nice if I could do that. If I don't do that, though, we'll be back in January, probably with ghost stories. Well, thank you everybody who's been watching this year. It is soothing to my soul to know that people still want to hear good old stories by the fireside. This has been Fireside Fairytales. I'll keep the fire warm. You have a good sleep.